we also acknowledge that somebody can be externally part of the visible church. I mean, the Augsburg Confession makes that. There's people who are attached to the church.
Absolutely.
You have to make the distinction. And so we've made the distinction historically between the church broadly speaking and the church narrowly speaking. And you have to. That distinction goes back to Aquinas, who says the church is the congregation of all faithful men from the beginning till the end of the world. Like, that's not Luther. That's just standard Augustinian theology.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we do have to have that, right? I mean, everybody acknowledges there is a visible church, and everybody acknowledge. I mean, Jesus is clear about this, right? The wheat and the tares, these kind of things. We all acknowledge that there are those in the church who are there externally who do not have faith. They can show up on a Sunday morning. You don't necessarily have faith just because you show up to church on a Sunday morning and you go up and take communion, and you've been baptized. So I think everybody's acknowledging that. But the question that raises is, but what is the nature of the new covenant, and what does it mean to be part of the new covenant? And then what is the relationship between the sacraments and what that new covenant is, right? So for Presbyterianism, when you have this prominent distinction between the external nature of the new covenant, then when you're speaking about the sacraments, what you can do is take those sacraments and then just say, well, this applies to that external membership in the new covenant, not the internal membership of the new covenant. So you can make all of these statements that certainly sound like someone is saved or regenerate, but you really don't mean it, right? So that's how they deal with, the apostasy passages in the book of Hebrews, for example, or the notion of in Galatians there being, you can be cut off from Christ or cut off from grace. And so they take those passages to say, well, then there has to be just this, since they believe in the perseverance of all the regenerate, right? So you can't fall away from the faith genuinely if you're really a regenerate Christian. And if that's the case, then that's the only way to understand those texts, unless you want to put a purely hypothetical spin on them, like the Reformed Baptists often do, which is just completely untenable, I think. But so you're left with these categories that I think are very confusing, and it's hard to differentiate between, well, what's then the external aspect of the new covenant and what's the internal real aspect of the new covenant. And it's come to the point where some of those who are, as I said, identified with the Federal Vision movement end up even saying things like, well, you are regenerate but not actually regenerate. And I just think it gets much more convoluted than it needs to.
Right. And Wilson notes something that's important to make. He makes the distinction. He says that most of these Federal Vision guys, Lighthart and them, are what he says they're Augustinians.
Right.
So there's a strong sense that God has chosen some, the elect, but regeneration isn't limited to that small group. Regeneration can be lost, and the gift of perseverance has to be given in order. And so he says and he calls that weird juju. But
yeah,
he says that he uses that to say that the Federal Vision guys or the one group that they're distinguishing themselves from, are Augustinian, whereas they are not Augustinian. They are post-Reformation Calvinist evangelicals. And he said that the terms of how their systems are slightly different. And when listening to that, I'm thinking, that's something that perhaps Reformed people need to recognize about Luther and Lutherans. We're also on that subject, we'd be some variety of Augustinian.